Thank you so much, David, and thanks for inviting me to come speak with you today. And you guys, thank you for waking up so early on a Saturday morning and giving us your time and attention. I can't think of anything more important to give to a cause, and that really shows your dedication and interest and how important you know that this topic is. I have the absolute privilege to help take care of patients and their skin on a daily basis, and really in the world of dermatology we focus on prevention and early detection for melanoma in both in patients and their families that may be at high risk. And for some of those, they don't even know that they're at high risk, but we're making strides in that. For those in the back, I tend to be a soft talker. If you can't hear me at any point, just raise your hand and I'll try to up the volume a little bit. So I have no disclosures. I today want to talk about a few topics that really are driven by... Better? Is that better for everyone in the back? Great. Most of my topics today come from questions that my patients actually ask me in clinic, and they come up over and over again. So I thought if they were questions that might be on your mind or thoughts that you've had in the past, we would try to touch on a few of those things and I'll try to answer them with the best of my ability with the data that we know as of today. So keep an open mind because these things are always changing and evolving. Today we're going to talk about why do we want to think about prevention. Of course, why is that important? I'm going to talk about the safety of sunscreens because that's a question that comes up with my patients all the time. And then we'll talk just briefly on the very controversial topic on photoprotection and vitamin D. I'm just going to dip my big toe in that deep well. And then I'm going to move on quickly to supplements and diet for melanoma prevention. I get asked a lot of questions about what can I be eating? Is there a supplement that I should be taking? What can I better do to change my risk for melanoma? And then I'll just give you the very latest and greatest on the tanning bed regulations as they stand today. So we all know there's a lot of melanoma risk factors out there, and many of these are due to genetics or things that have happened in our past that we can't necessarily change right now. But going forward, we want to think about, well, how can we do better? Or, you know, if it's not too late, what can we modify? And those things that are modifiable, and this is not an exhaustive list, but mainly they focus on one common denominator. So history of excessive sun exposure, serious sunburns, having used tanning beds. All of this has to do with sunlight or ultraviolet radiation. So this is your wake-up slide of the morning, so don't look directly at the slide. The WHO classifies ultraviolet light as a known carcinogen, and they have also classified the ultraviolet light that comes from tanning bed as a known carcinogen. So that is sort of a known fact that's out there, and we all have to sort of work on this planet where we're exposed to this carcinogen all the time. And it's not, of course, not all bad. It gives us a lot of good too, but basically my message is moderation and work smarter out there. Enjoy what you love, do what you do, but be smart when you're out in the sun because we do know that it causes cancer. Now, the different types of ultraviolet light put out by the sun are UVA, UVB, and UVC. Now, we don't talk a lot about the UVC rays. You certainly don't see it on the labels of your sunscreen out there on the grocery store shelves, and that's because the ozone really blocks over 99% of it from reaching the Earth's surface. So another reason to protect our environment, when we lose that ozone, we are all going to be in trouble from this UVC that gets through. But until then, we really focus on UVA and UVB. And to look at that a little bit head-to-head here, UVB are the rays that are make up about 5% of those ultraviolet rays that reach the Earth's surface. So 95% of them then are made up of the UVA rays, which we really haven't historically been that good at protecting against or thinking much about, because it's the UVB, B for burning, rays that really are responsible for causing a lot of the sunburns, and that's what the sunscreens historically have been quite good at protecting us against. It's the UVA rays that are more involved in the immediate tanning and photoaging. They both are involved in immunosuppression within the skin, and certainly the UVA rays are much more immunosuppressive than the UVB rays. We actually take advantage of that in dermatology for some inflammatory conditions. We will actually put patients in light boxes, medical grade tanning beds, to actually decrease their skin conditions. Now, I wouldn't, like psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, so these very inflammatory conditions, I wouldn't necessarily do that for my high-risk skin cancer or melanoma patients, but we certainly do take advantage of the immunosuppressing nature of ultraviolet light. They both are known to cause cancer. And they do that in a little bit of different ways. The UVB rays directly act and damage the cellular DNA structures, causing these pyrimidine dimers. And the UVA rays do a little bit of that, but mostly they affect their change on the DNA through reactive oxygen species or free radicals. So how do we all get our UV exposure? Where there's a lot of different varieties and ways that we do that. Over the course of our lifetime, there's something called a cumulative sun exposure, where you just add up all the sun you've had every day of your life, and that seems to matter when it comes to risk of skin cancer, more being increased risk of skin cancer than less. Early or childhood sunburn seems to really matter when it comes to skin cancer risk. And of course, the severe and blistering sunburns. So not just red and sore and a little bit peely, but those true water-filled blisters that can occur if you've fallen asleep in the sun, or some people will remember, and if they can tell me the date that they had one of those sunburns. And usually it's one and done. Usually this ruins your vacation, ruins a week or two of your life. You don't tend to do this again. It's pretty severe. People feel really sick and crummy when that happens. But it absolutely increases our risk of skin cancer, including melanoma. And then there's the chronic and continuous sun exposure. So that's someone who works outside all the time and is continuously exposed to the sun. That's very interesting because though that increases our cumulative sun exposure over the course of a lifetime, it actually turns out that it's probably protective when it comes to melanoma risk. And there's something very interesting going on there. Our genes kind of at work to protect us when we're out there all the time, day after day after day. That's very different than, say, someone who works at a desk and then runs off to Hawaii in the middle of the winter and gets that intermittent sunburn, but it's sort of, I hear this, it's just once a year or it's just 1 or 2 times a year, but those intermittent sunburns are probably much more important for increasing our risk of melanoma than, say, a continuous low level of sun over time. So I tell them, please don't do that again this year when you run off to Hawaii, because it's really what we do here in Seattle, right? We work all day, all throughout the year, and then we run off to Hawaii or Arizona right in the middle of February, and we get a sunburn or two. And then, of course, exposure to tanning beds has absolutely been linked to increased risk of skin cancer, including melanoma. And devastatingly, that's affecting a very young portion of our population, otherwise very healthy young people that are getting pretty devastating, turning up with devastating melanomas. And of course, melanoma and skin cancers in general are on the rise. One's lifetime risk as of right now of developing melanoma is about 1 in 59, and those numbers are continuing to increase. So we're really trying to think of ways to change this trend over time. And I think it's important to do that. In 2015, about 74,000 cases newly diagnosed of melanoma, and about just under 10,000 deaths. So this really is a deadly form of skin cancer. And even though it makes up less than 5% of all cancers diagnosed, I think it has a huge impact on our society and the healthcare dollars that we spend. It's estimated that in 2030, if we don't shift this trend, we are going to see upwards of 112,000 new cases of melanoma that year. And we're talking about a tripling of the cost to take care of this disease, somewhere from about $400 million in 2011 to something like $1.6 billion in 2030, just in a cancer that's less than 5% of all of those diagnosed out there. So we need to do something to change what's been going on. This really hits close to home when you live in the Pacific Northwest, right? So if you look at our lovely corner of the country, we have some of the highest skin cancer melanoma rates of all the states. And looking like that in chart form, Washington is 9th on the top 10 list from 2012 data, followed very closely by Oregon. And that surprises a lot of people, I think. I think there's this sort of myth out there that we're protected in the Pacific Northwest. Our cloudy days, I tell people, I ask them if they're protecting themselves from the sun, and they say, what sun? And we kind of have a little chuckle. But really, I think it's a quite deceptive climate that we live in. It even gets worse if you live in the Puget Sound area. So if you take a look at the state of Washington, the highest rates of melanoma are really concentrated within the Puget Sound. So again, from data from 2009 to 2011, if you took just the Puget Sound, not the whole state of Washington, and lined it up with the melanoma rates across the country, state by state, we would have the 4th highest rate of melanoma, which is pretty shocking. So something is really going on here. We really need to keep working hard at figuring out how to prevent this and stem the tide. So as a dermatologist, I spend a lot of my time talking about sunscreen and preventing melanoma. And that's really true. That's been true for a long time, even though we didn't have that much data to say that using sunscreen is actually preventing melanoma. We just sort of believed it to be true. We knew that it had to be true, and we pushed it. And it didn't have any actual studies or data behind it that showed that was true. We had studies that showed it prevented squamous cell carcinoma, a non-melanoma type of skin cancer, and precancers, but not melanoma. And that is until about 2011 when this landmark study dropped out of Australia. And it finally showed that sunscreen actually does work to prevent melanoma, the deadliest type of skin cancer. And they looked at about 1,600 patients or people out there randomly assigned to either using daily sunscreen use or just discretionary use. Use it if you're going to, don't if you're not. And then they sort of intervened for about 4.5 years and then followed them for another 10 years. So over the course of this 15-year study, they showed that the patients that were assigned to the daily sunscreen use had about half as many new melanomas diagnosed in that 15-year time than the patients that were just using their sunscreen discretionarily, if they were going outside or whenever they remembered. So finally, we have a game changer study that shows up and actually gives us data or proof behind our recommendations to use sunscreen for the daily prevention of sunscreen. This really was something we were all waiting for in the world of dermatology, and you guys might not have known that we didn't have that in our back pocket, but we finally do. And of course, then the next question is, you're telling me to use my sunscreen, but is it safe? And that's the question I get asked all the time in my clinic. I, in fact, have patients that won't use sunscreen because they worry about this exact question. And so we talk about this a lot. And I just want to briefly tell you what are the myths that are out there and then kind of synthesize the data as it stands right now and tell you what my current recommendation or feeling is on this topic. So the first one is that your sunscreen is going to give you cancer, not that it's going to protect you from cancer. And this is really focused on the ingredient Retinyl Palmitate that is in some of the chemical blocking sunscreens. And there's all kinds of, for probably a couple decades now, this worry or concern has been propagated out there. The next one is that your sunscreen is going to have a hormone-like activity inside your body. And this is more in the oxybenzone ingredient concern because it has some estrogen-like effects or progesterone-like effects in the test tubes. And then zinc oxide is going to absorb through your skin and get into your body. So that one is really focused more not so much on the zinc oxide or titanium dioxide, the ingredients themselves, but more on this question of, is the nanoparticle technology that has been developed to keep these ingredients much more cosmetically elegant, is that technology actually safe? And as it turns out, we as consumers don't love walking around with this white pasty mask on our face, so I've been known to do it and do it proudly. And everyone who grew up in the 80s with the zinc oxide or the Zinca, we remember that's just how it was. But they've gotten a lot better out there, right? Much more elegant preparations, thinner, it goes on smoothly, it absorbs clearly, and people are able to wear these more on a daily use because they don't have to go to work looking like a ghost, right? It's socially not necessarily all that acceptable, I will admit that. So the question is really, are these things getting absorbed because of the new technology used to make them more cosmetically pleasing? And just to kind of give you a very short summary, based on all the evidence that's out there right now, Retinyl Palmitate, there's really no convincing evidence of photocarcinogenesis. This is a cousin of vitamin A, which is actually found in our body and gets metabolized just like it does in our bodies, and it actually has some photoprotective or antioxidant effects within the biological system of the skin. All of the studies that have been done or call this into question so far have really been in isolated systems in the lab without the biological context that are found in our bodies. So right now there's really no convincing evidence that we are worried as a field in dermatology for this particular ingredient. For oxybenzone, that's the one that has the estrogenic effects. They've looked at studies more in vitro and an in vivo animal model. That's where the studies of concern may come from. But there's really been no causal relationship of any disruption of hormonal imbalance in humans that has been shown. They cannot find persistent levels of this ingredient in the human body or bloodstream with daily or usual use with this medicine or this sunscreen. So right now it's been around since the 70s, has excellent safety data, and there's been no convincing studies in the human body outside of test tubes or animals when they actually give this ingredient for rats to eat at high concentrations. It does not seem like the way we are using these sunscreens, it's having that problematic effect. Now, I do tell my patients, please do not eat your sunscreen. All bets are off. I do not know what it's going to do to you. And then with regard to the nanoparticles, I do believe that they are getting absorbed in some instances. There were two very interesting studies done mainly in mice, but they did label the zinc in the zinc oxide particles, and it turns out that this technology is pretty awesome. It does exactly what we're asking it to do. It absorbs better. And when it absorbs, a small amount is actually getting detectable within the body and within our organs, but these are very, very minute amounts. There's been no evidence that it actually disrupts zinc homeostasis within the animal, and it does not seem to be at levels that we should be concerned about at this time. So we're talking about very, very minute microgram amounts when we are eating more like 9 to 11 milligrams in our diet every day. So it doesn't seem like that is a concern at this time, and that's the data where it stands. Time will tell as more and better studies come out, but if there was any concern, that's kind of where we're at. So we are still feeling pretty safe about using these sunscreens, and all ingredients that are currently FDA approved here in the United States we're not feeling too apprehensive about in the world of dermatology. I think in general, as a consumer, as a patient myself, as a mom who's slathering this stuff all over her little kids, I think you do have to consider what the data is, what are your concerns, and what might be a drawing line in the sand for you or your particular risk factors. There might be ingredients that you feel more comfortable over others, and I think right now that can be a personal decision, but I think there is probably something out there for everyone. From a safety concern, I don't think that's a good reason at this time to not want to wear your sunscreen. Hopefully that's helpful. And then the next question I get, well, Dr. Gardner, what about my 15 minutes in the sun? And this really comes from the vitamin D issue, right, that we need to go get 10 or 15 minutes unprotected time out in the sunshine. And even their primary care doctors are telling them, go do this. But I will tell you, the vitamin D story and sunshine story gets very, very confusing very, very quickly. And you can find just as many studies out there that show that it's not, that it does not correlate with problems as studies that do show that it correlates with problems. Certainly we know that vitamin D and calcium are very important in skeletal health, and it seems important that we have good vitamin D levels. No dermatologist is wanting to make their patients or okay with their patients having low vitamin D levels. And if you're using your sunscreen and your sun protection the way we are asking you to and doing an amazing job, actually you can affect your vitamin D levels. The truth of the matter is when they do the studies, most comers out there that are using sunscreen or protecting their skin aren't doing it in a very great way to actually affect their vitamin D at all. But for those like myself that are amazing at this, we probably are affecting our vitamin D. So I stand with the American Academy of Dermatology. They do have a position statement on this topic in particular based on the level of evidence out there, not just for skeletal health and vitamin D, but also for some of the other associated studies, things like associations with autoimmune diseases and cancer, that it's probably a good idea to get your vitamin D, but there's no safe level or time to go out and get a known amount of sunshine, a known carcinogen, and expect that that's the best way to get your vitamin D. It also comes from the fact that they've done lots of studies in populations of people that live out at the beach, surfers and people that get sunshine all the time. And they went and they checked their vitamin D levels, thinking, well, if anyone's got great vitamin D levels, or we need to know what normal or sort of the high end of normal is, let's check their levels. Well, it turns out there's a pretty good proportion of those people that have low vitamin D levels too, at least in the lab. So we truly don't quite understand the full story on the vitamin D topic. And so right now, we do believe it's good to have good, adequate vitamin D, but probably it's not the most efficient way to get it through your through your skin in the sun, and probably your intention of getting your vitamin D levels boosted is not potentially going to be met if you're really relying on getting it through the skin. So we advocate eating it or drinking fortified beverages to get your vitamin D. I'm going to move on past the vitamin D story, because the other question I get all the time is, hey, is there anything I can do to eat, a supplement I can take, or something I should do or change about my diet that might protect me from melanoma or skin cancer? And there's a lot of natural ingredients out there with health benefits that boost antioxidant levels, right? And basically what we're doing is we're understanding that our body's natural ability to protect itself from the stresses of modern day living, pollution and smoking and diet and sun, all of this, breathing, all of this results in aging and free radical production, and our body's natural defense systems to use their natural antioxidants get overwhelmed very quickly. So we naturally want to look to the natural world and say, hey, you've kind of figured this out already, and maybe we should sort of harness some of those techniques in the natural world in plants and vegetables and fruits and try to get a boost of our own antioxidant system. It's very, very logical. One of the things I want to tell you about is something derived from a fern plant that I think has a lot of promise in doing just this, especially a supplement to prevent or help us protect our skin from the harmful rays of the sun. And this is a plant that is native to Central and South America. It originally was an aquatic fern that sort of over time evolved to become a land fern and somehow had to solve the problem of how to protect itself from the sun. That wasn't such an issue when it was in the water. And it turns out that it's very high in certain antioxidant properties. And the fern's name is Polypodium leucotomos, and it's been around for over 30 years in both topical and oral supplement formulations. It's over the counter, and you can get it on Amazon probably same day today if you wanted to. Definitely by the 2-day. I got it that way myself. Right now, we're recommending that it's used in addition to sunscreen and other sun protection methods, not just used on its own. But the really fascinating thing about this, and it's really kind of increased the number of studies that are looking at this and protecting skin from other photosensitizing disorders and also prevention of skin cancer, it's actually changing people's innate ability to protect itself from the sun from the inside out. It's changing patients or people's MED, so minimal erythematous dose, which is a body's natural ability to say how much sun can come onto the skin before it produces a little bit of pink. Does that make sense? So a little bit of that first little bit of burn. Everybody's amount of sun that does that to their skin is different. Mine is pretty low. Some people might have more natural protection than me. But actually, by taking the supplement at various amounts, from low one dose supplement can change my MED and protect me from the sun, allowing me to tolerate a higher dose of sunshine before I get that burn. Though I wouldn't recommend just using that alone. It's something that could supplement your ability to protect yourself from the sun. It's been studied. It's quite safe even at higher doses. And they've looked at this particular supplement, interestingly, in a handful of very high-risk melanoma patients. These are patients with familial melanoma, multiple primaries, actual genetic mutations in the genes that can cause melanoma. So these patients actually had a change in their MED, their minimal erythematous dose, and it resulted in some extra protection. It seemed that the patients that were at highest risk actually got the most bang for their buck as well. So something very interesting going on with this fern. And so if I'm going to recommend any natural supplement at this point in time, it's probably this. It's marketed under a couple of different companies or brands. Fern Block and Heliocare are a couple of them, but they are now available in about 26 countries, and you can get that here as well. Since we're in Seattle, we should probably talk about this coffee study. Who had their morning coffee today? I definitely did. So depends on how much you drink, but it turns out it seems like the caffeinated types of coffee taken at higher amounts, so this has to be at least over 4 cups of coffee, which is a lot of coffee, may protect and reduce melanoma risk by about 20%. So there's a few issues with this study, but it does seem promising. They're going to have to replicate this, and they're going to have to take a look at just how much can we harness. Probably, a lot of coffee, right? That's how I would be, too, if I drank over 4 cups of coffee. What's that? Who was the sponsor of that study? I know. Actually, they were looking back at, I think it was the NIH AARP prospective cohort study. So this was like 450,000 people that they had a questionnaire study on, and they looked back and they took a look to see who over time developed melanoma. Statistics ensued, and they found out that people that drank a lot of coffee, when they checked that off on their questionnaire, seemed to have some type of protective effect. That did not hold up in the decaffeinated coffee users, so there's something probably to do with the components of caffeinated coffee that is protecting against skin cancer and melanoma specifically. So they've got to do a little bit more research on this, but I think it's very intriguing. It's in line with what they've found in the test tube and the lab as well, as far as caffeine's ability to mitigate against the DNA damage that occurs with sun and UV radiation. So I think there's probably something to this. I think it's going to be hard to do it in 4 cups of coffee a day for most.
And what is the definition of a cup of coffee?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think it's my definition of a cup of coffee. Mine was 16 ounces today, and I think that would count for at least 2, maybe more. Yeah.
So you think it's 8 ounces or 4?
Oh, I don't remember the details of that. Is 6 an actual cup? Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any kind of scientific wild ass guess how much protection you get from fern?
Oh, how much you get from the fern?
Then some.
It probably depends on the study. The studies are very small right now, at least looking at skin cancer. And I can't remember in that group with the melanoma, the higher risk melanoma, see if I have any data. No, I don't remember off the top of my head. They probably put it into some statistical number, but I really think bigger studies are going to have to show us what really translates to and how much we can get away with just supplementing versus still needing to slather on our sunscreen. We're just not quite there yet. Yeah, that's a great question, though. Okay, so that's our caffeine. But what about other things in diet and melanoma, right? So there's been a couple of really nice review articles in about 2014 in the dermatology literature looking at a lot of studies, things like alcohol consumption, certain types of fats in our diet, things like resveratrol and other grapeseed extracts, lycopene, some of these very antioxidant-rich ingredients. They looked at selenium and vitamin D, vitamin E, and And it turns out there's nothing very definitive. A lot of these things are in vitro or animal studies looking at these. Seems like certain things are more promising than others, but we really haven't figured out what the story is when it comes to antioxidants and prevention of skin cancer and melanoma. We don't know which ones are better. We don't know which ones are how much of what we need to take. We don't know who are the best people to try one or the other type of dietary intervention. And I think that this, basically what all of the reviews have sort of come down on is that we really feel that this is promising, this may be the future, but it's really controversial right now to recommend any one particular thing when it comes to diet in the prevention of melanoma. And this is sort of like before when we were touting sunscreen so strongly for the prevention of melanoma. We didn't have that data, but we just so knew in our hearts that it was true. We really feel that it's got to be true when it comes to antioxidants and the prevention of skin cancer or cancer in general. But I think we've had a really hard time putting our finger on exactly how this works or how we can best harness that idea and put it into practice to work for us to meet that goal in life. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One thing I want to mention is that when we are harnessing the benefits of food and nature, there's got to be a flip side, right? There's got to be some things out there that don't protect us but may harm us, and that makes a lot of sense. One thing that came out in the course of this last year is something that might be surprising to some folks, that citrus consumption may actually increase our risk of cutaneous malignant melanoma. So things that seem very, very healthy, like grapefruit and lemon and lime and orange, and these things might actually increase our risk of melanoma. And I think there's probably some good truth to this for a couple of different reasons. The study was really great. It looked at two very large groups of people prospectively, both men and women. We're talking in the tens of thousands here. And they saw that people who ate citrus 1.6 servings a day or over 3 servings a week had an increased risk of melanoma compared to those who just ate it less than that, less than 2 times per week or just very intermittently. And it turns out that citrus fruits contain a natural ingredient called psoralins. And we use these psoralins in medicine all the time. When I have my patient with psoriasis and I want to, or with even a type of skin cancer called cutaneous lymphoma, and I need to make them better, I may put them into a light box. But the best way to get them clear is through ultraviolet A radiation. Turns out that UVA radiation isn't that effective all on its own. So what we do is we put these psoralin ingredients that were derived from plants and nature that are very photoactive, and we give it to them in a pill. And we ask them to take a couple pills right before they get into the light box. And those pills plus the UVA radiation actually are synergistic in causing the type of DNA damage that we need for their overactive immune cells to settle down. Well, this is happening most likely naturally in patients that are, or people that are eating a lot of citrus fruits and getting a lot of these psoralins in their system and then getting a lot of sun exposure. So they saw most of the skin cancers in these patients that had this correlation in the very photo-distributed areas. So it was a synergistic effect, most likely, of what they were eating, plus the sunshine being shined in those areas of the skin. And I think there's probably something to this. So if you're thinking about what can I do a little bit differently with regard to diet, I think this may be something to modify. Now, the ones that shook out to be most statistically significant were those that were eating grapefruits and orange juice. And it's probably because grapefruits have an increased amount of these psoralins, and orange juice is more likely that it's just a higher consumed amount that people, if they're orange juice drinkers, they're going to drink it on a regular basis and drink quite a bit of it. So there's something interesting there. I think it's probably true across the board when it comes to citrus. They're going to have to do further studies, but most people aren't, eating limes by the bucketful every day. So I think that's why the grapefruit and the orange juice story has shook out so far. But this is holding up in the way that they're looking at it in a couple different populations. So stay tuned a little bit more on that. And then, of course, there's always got to be a catch, right? We talked about this, how difficult it's been to sort of pin down the antioxidant and prevention story for melanoma. And it may be because we're not sure who to look for, which patients it actually matters for, and in which patients it actually might hurt in. So this was a study that dropped in October. I was sitting in maternity leave, and I saw a glimpse of this study, and I just, head to the hand, and I just thought, oh my gosh, all the stuff that we think is true and believe is beneficial may actually have a catch. And this is a mice study, so a little bit of grain of salt here, but they actually showed that giving mice antioxidants actually increased their risk for melanoma metastasis. And they've shown this in mice with lung cancer with regard to metastasis too. So there is some mounting evidence out there that antioxidants may not be beneficial in all comers. And if you think about it, it may be that the cancer cells, once they're there, they may be actually harnessing the good of antioxidants for their survival benefit themselves, and forget about the host. And we don't really know what's going on. But I want to put that out there on the table, and I have no idea what to do about it, but I think this warrants a lot of further study and an open mind going forward, that a high antioxidant approach may not be the best for everyone out there. Yeah?
You've isolated antioxidants or antioxidants in the context of whole food?
No, they were isolated, yeah. And this was a mouse study. They were actually feeding them certain amounts, of a couple of different ones, yeah. It's a good question. So it's so complicated, right, when you actually get into these, what it's actually doing in the biological context of a human body, and what does that mean. So this is as far as I know, and I just want to put it out there, and it just should keep an open mind about this type of thing. It may also be why we're having such a hard time figuring out the benefits of antioxidants in general population studies. Maybe we need to stratify who we're looking at and then look to see who it's most beneficial for, and we'll start to see some statistical significance. All right, so I'm going to move on past diet and melanoma because it gets controversial fast too. So when it comes to indoor tanning and melanoma, we know that it is a carcinogen, right? It has been associated with all three types of the major skin cancers: squamous cell, basal cell, and of course melanoma. We know that it's our young, non-Hispanic white females that are predominant users of the tanning beds. And we know that tanning before the age of 35 will increase risk of melanoma, and it's not insignificant. It's somewhere between 59 and 75% increased risk for these patients. It's a big deal. It's estimated that more than 400,000 cases of skin cancer each year are related to use of tanning beds, and of those, 6,000 are melanomas. So as of, this is about March of 2016 data, the indoor tanning youth access laws, not all states have them. We're looking at a good majority now, though, that do have some restrictions when it comes to minors using tanning beds. Before, just a few years ago, anyone could go in at any time, whatever age, and just sign up and use some tanning beds for as much as they wanted. And we know that that's probably not the best thing for our overall society's health. In December of 2015, so just a few months ago, the breaking news was that the FDA actually proposed an under 18 age restriction on indoor tanning across the board, so every state across the country to have an actual restriction for use of tanning beds. So I think that a victory is really on the horizon here, coming up either if not this year, then hopefully next. So just to wrap up, I think at this point in time, the data that we have to go on, sunscreens are safe and generally recommended as one component for skin cancer prevention, including melanoma. And I think it needs to be used in the context of other prevention methods, so hats, clothing, avoiding those peak sun hours, and use of shade and sunglasses. Vitamin D is important, so eat it.
Is there an SPF recommendation?
Right now, I'm recommending SPF 30 or above. When I have patients that are running off to Hawaii trying to avoid those intermittent sunburns, I actually ask them to bump it up to a 50 to 70 and reapply every 2 hours or so. It's a big difference with the protection you get from 0 to 30. There is still some benefit going from 30 to 50, maybe a tiny bit more, 50 to 70. After 70, I think it's just a marketing word out on the shelves and probably just more money to spend on which number is better. So. And nutrition and melanoma, I think stay tuned. It's definitely something that's going to be studied more and more. There's a huge interest in this. We're all trying to figure this out, but I don't think right now we fully understand what's going on. And then tanning bed restrictions for minors, I really think this national victory is on the horizon. So with that, I want to just end with the fact that we have a lot more to do still. This was a big trend in 2015. Does anyone know about hashtag sunburn art? Again, hand to the head. So yeah, this is actually when young adults will go out and paint sunscreen and designs on their skin and actually intentionally try to get those intermittent sunburns. And then they take pictures and put it on their social media and hashtag it sunburn art. I really hope this is not a trend that takes off and sweeps the nation, but this is just to show you that we haven't done our job as fully as we would like to just yet. So still more work to do.